So in the last, I don't know, it feels like since the start of the year, every week there's been a new supply chain or developer style attack.
Mhm.
Most recently, we'll talk about the thing that happened at GitHub where they, lost or exfiltrated thousands of repositories. The Axios thing, Vercel got breached, Grafana got breached last week. Like what? What the heck is going on?
Yeah, no, I know it's, I mean, there's never been a lot of focus, I guess, by attackers on the open source area, particularly because it's so, like, not managed. And then really with that in mind, like, on the developer toolkit, on the IDE and the packages that developers tend to use. Because for us, what really triggered us was the whole Team PCP, attack with, Trivy and Light LLM, which different actor, but I think very similar kind of attack vector.
Yet another one. Yeah, I forgot about that. Someone actually interviewed them and they gave some tips, which we can read later. The group gave tips on what you should do so you don't get hacked by them. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, no, I forgot about that one for a sec. Yeah, I mean, it's really, I don't know. Maybe I'm pedantic, but I don't remember it ever being this bad in like 11, 12. What is it, like almost 15 years in cyber now? And what's weird to me is that it just feels kind of normal now for every week to have a bunch of secrets and source code get stolen and machines get compromised. So I guess to your point, attackers are just going after developers now because of what? Just the permissiveness of the tools that they have? What's actually changed, if anything?
I think that I think it's really just the growth of the open source community is finally being exploited in terms of like how unmanaged it is. And then there's been a proliferation in the tools, right, that companies use to build the software that they build, particularly SaaS companies. And I think a lot of that's been exacerbated by AI, right? Where, now when you look at IDEs, there's all of these AI-based IDEs like VS Code, for instance, and then Cursor, which is essentially a fork of it. And, all of those, it's proliferating rapidly. And because a lot of them are underpinned by this larger marketplace of open source software, it's not really managed. And I think there's also a sense in which a lot of the security community assumed that open source was somehow inherently safer because it was vetted by more people, or at least that was kind of the assumption, than the proprietary software that people didn't really get to kind of peek under the hood. But that's at least initially what comes to mind is why I think it may be the current target du jour.
Yeah. I still think open source is probably, especially with AI being able to find vulnerabilities now, is probably more secure, but the supply chain of open source, different story, I would think.
Agreed, agreed.
Yeah. So unpack what happened this week or a few days ago, because I think that the AI lens will be interesting, but just for everyone that hasn't seen the news, a developer at Microsoft GitHub was using Visual Studio Code, another Microsoft product, and they had the extension for a tool that they use. This extension was widely deployed. I think it had like 2.5 million installs, and it got compromised. And actually, the compromise itself was because of another supply chain attack from the TAN stack that happened that compromised the extension security. More on that later. So this extension gets compromised, and it's on the Visual Studio Code marketplace for a total of 18 minutes. But the extension's auto update. So the developer's machine grabbed this, new update at Microsoft. It automatically ran. It ran, I think, the Shai Halud infostealer, exfiltrated 3,800 internal repositories and probably a bunch of secrets. That's like what we know so far. And in the age of AI, it's like before, if someone pulled that off, right, and wanted to like kind of like hop to the next, target, that's a lot of stuff to go through.
Mhm.
You could presumably put all the entire repository into, your favorite coding assistant and not just find vulnerabilities, but try to find like paths and things that you might want to exfiltrate when they're stealing secrets now. If they have like 10,000 secrets, it doesn't matter. The AI can go and try all of them. So it feels like maybe that's contributed towards the speed of these things.
I mean, the AI and the speed relationship is definitely, I think, key. I mean, it takes me back to my military days where in Seventh Fleet, Time Vice Admiral Swift was the commander of Seventh Fleet. He had a saying essentially that, time is the denominator for risk. And, I think when we think about even cybersecurity risk, it is a very similar relationship. And we had this ongoing assumption that, there was always going to be time to be able to patch vulnerabilities, time to be able to detect intrusions, to be able to respond to them. And, with AI, despite all the hallucinations that may come with the models, that denominator is rapidly approaching zero for us.
Yeah. So I guess on that, you're the chief information security officer of Astronomer, which is you're an interesting spot because your flagship product has a massive open source presence, and presumably you also have a pretty big commercial, like enterprise presence, from what I can see from logos on the website. How are you thinking about this as a CISO in that kind of organization, both from an internal standpoint, but also how are your customers thinking about this? Because I imagine you're working with some of the biggest security teams on the planet. I'm sure you have third party risk management people reaching out because of this stuff. I'd love to know like how you think about all this stuff.
Yeah, so I think the risk, it really goes into like two buckets, right? There's the risk to our own organization, and I put the really like the SDLC and the environment and engineers working in that bucket. And then there's the risk that our product may expose directly or indirectly to the customers that use it. Uh, when we think about the bin for our own environment, the enterprise, and what the engineers are working on, a lot of it, I would say, doesn't really change with the nature of the threat. Again, it's just now speed. It's much more of ensuring you have the best practices already in place. You don't have long-lived credentials. You don't have credentials that are on your local endpoints. You have dedicated development environments so that you can assume that it could be tainted and blow it away quickly without impacting your entire software development pipeline. So, that's, I think, that been there and kind of the way we approach it there. The other one, though, in terms of for customers, a lot of it is around the vulnerabilities that we might be imposing. Mythos kind of raises the whole, I guess, the whole vector, so to speak, or really smashes the panic button, right? Because everyone's like, oh no, Mythos is going to find everything and provide an exploit now. So we have a lot of customers that are pushing us for, hey, we need the ability to get new models that are addressing these vulnerabilities within days, not weeks of them coming out. And so that coupled with, I would say some theater around the way like SOC 2 and all works and kind of really looking at what it was trying to address and fix it when we think about like pen tests, we're moving much more towards an ongoing pen test, a continual pen testing framework into much faster build processes for our core modules that, control things such as like authentication and the data integrity and security of what our customers are using.
Yeah. So on the you touched on something that you made it sound really simple, but I want to unpack it, which is some of the long-lived tokens and stuff on developer machines. So, like you, I've worked in really restrictive enterprise-style environments. Maybe not as restrictive as the Navy, but typically, if you're an enterprise and there's an endpoint, it's really locked down, right? Majority of the time. For developers, we've had to carve stuff out because they needed more permissions, right? They get to install stuff, especially if you're an astronomer, you're working on a command line utility, you have to run the utility. Probably similar to the engineer at GitHub, like they need to be able to do stuff on their system to do their job, right?
Hmm.
So the problem becomes a lot harder because we can't just like lock everything down. No one's going to get anything done, right?
Right.
How do you do all of that? Like, I know you talked about version pinning and stuff like that, which is all really good, but like, how do you think about that? How do you think about handling secrets in these machines? And people do have tokens, and permission models. Like, where do you start with this stuff if you have a team of 100 engineers, maybe all with just probably secrets and environment variables in their computer, personal access tokens, extensions installed both in Visual Studio Code, maybe a windsurf and cursor. It kind of seems like a really big surface area to attack.
No, it definitely is. Kind of the approach we took it was, I would say, three main kind of. One is, of course, the tried and true principle of least privilege, right? Of making sure that people you don't everyone does not need admin access to everything, right? So you really should only have that, and arguably, no one should have admin itself. It should be something that they need either some like just-in-time provisioning or whatnot to be able to get that limited duration kind of access to. The other thing too around that is really trying to create a sanctuary, for lack of a better term, of where the development actually happens. So the CI/CD pipeline, I think, is really like the crown jewels that you need to protect, and ensuring that there are no long-lived credentials, particularly to that, as well as to the code base there as well. Like you touched on with the GitHub breach there, and all of the potential tokens that were taken out, and also in how the NX exploit actually had a precursor that kind of was that these long-lived paths and whatnot that can be used to then gain access. So removing that has been a big thing for us. And there's actually an open source um, a framework that ChainGuard actually provides that we use to create more ephemeral tokens to be able to access to GitHub. So That is something that we actually use in house, and we definitely like the way that that works and has allowed us to shore that up. The other thing is then for access to infrastructure, the having vault management or secret storage away from developer laptops and being able to use that so that there is never the actual token if possible and that it is always short lived. That's easy to rotate if necessary so that even if we catch a whiff of "Hey, this potentially might be compromised, we can immediately rotate it, keep the lights going, productivity online, minimal impact to the team and the customers."
Makes sense. And the chain guard thing, is that like a proxy vault control plan style thing that you have where you can have people, instead of sending a request directly, have the headers get kind of modified and they never see it in their machine? Or is that more of like a tool being used for authorization somewhere? I'm not familiar.
So specifically, it's OctoSTS. So it's basically open source token service that they have. It integrates at like an app level with GitHub. So it essentially arbitrates that the relationship there. But yeah, no, it's, I mean, as it kind of even states on its website, it is pretty good at eliminating long-lived credentials, enabling, RIDC federation, et cetera.
That makes sense. Yeah, the thing that always keeps me up at night is the one thing I feel like I don't have a great handle on is sometimes the only way to hook up an MCP is just like a token, right? And we can put it in one password, we can put it in, keychain, we can put it in the vault, but then it's still there if somebody can access it. So I know, like, I think like one password has a product where they can route requests through and like do the replacement, and they can basically do the request there and give you like an ephemeral token. But I feel like some of these things we might just have to wait for these services to just offer OAuth for these things, and hopefully device bound OAuth, because it's just a nightmare to have these tokens laying around.
No, it is, it is. And we actually have a project that we've been exploring internally too. We haven't yet implemented it, but it's in the, I would say the design phase right now where we're actually inverting, I would say the paradigm of, MCP proxies and agents where we actually will have like the agent stored in a VPC container or use like AWS Bedrock or whatnot. And then we'll have a locally hosted MCP proxy, but that MCP proxy gets all the tokens it needs from a VPC hosted vault, whether it's HashiCorp, OpenBow, whatever. And then that way we're able to control those tokens and credentials at scale across the workforce. And then we can also monitor AI interaction without it actually existing on the employee's laptop. So that's something that we've seen a lot of success with. We're still putting the finishing touches on, and we'll be rolling that out here probably in the next quarter.
Super cool. Yeah, and some of this stuff, it's funny. Some of this stuff seems like it's really scary and you need a security engineer. But in some ways, I argue we're kind of in the golden ages right now because of coding agents. Like when, we saw what happened with, Trivi and Axios, we looked at our GitHub actions and we realized, okay, there's some tokens in there. So we just asked Claude Code to go implement OIDC in our actions, and it did it. Some of these things is like, there's not really excuse before. In the past, it would have been a bigger, we would have figured it out, but it would have been a much bigger project, or some companies would really wait for security engineer. But now you can kind of take these best practices. In fact, in our engineering blog, you can copy all of our blog posts as Markdown and just feed it to your agent and just be like, hey, can you go do the same thing?
Mhm.
I think like awareness is important. I also want to just add, I think like a lot of organizations probably don't have any kind of like MDM or OS query running. And there's just an element too of like visibility that people don't have. And like what's being installed extension wise for some of these things and what's been on there in the past, I think is like a big blind spot for people. Not that it's any replacement for mitigation, but I talk to a lot of companies and they just have no idea what's being deployed in any of these machines.
No, agree. The visibility is a huge thing. I think even in that post-mortem that came out around the NX plugin was, kind of highlighted that, around who's actually monitoring their GitHub audit logs, right? I mean, how many people ingest that into a SIM and actually look at it?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And yeah, you take any of these problems and you unpack them further. Like I went down a rabbit hole in the VS Code thing because I was thinking, okay, how do you like, for libraries, we can, pin versions to hashes. We can do minimum age thresholds and things. But like, what do I do about a VS Code extension? Not that we use a lot of them, but I just dug into it and it's actually kind of a disaster. You have to go and get GitHub Enterprise to be able to self-host a container that's your own marketplace that you connect to via your MDM managed VS codes, and then you can pin versions for things based on that. But I don't know if you can disable auto updates there. Like it just seems really not. And the only way to ship an extension, and I know it's because we made one for simulation. The only way to ship it automatically is with a personal access token. So like all these, back to the NX console thing, they had no choice but to have it. Like they don't even Microsoft won't let them do anything else to ship these things. So yeah, there's just like a lot of low-hanging fruit. It feels like an ecosystem that no one feels really incentivized to solve, but hopefully that changes.
Well, I'm sure Microsoft has a product too that can hopefully catch that.
Well, the product is if you get GitHub Enterprise,
Yes.
and then they give you the privilege of managing what's being installed in Visual Studio Code. But I got to imagine, and like I don't know anything about Microsoft internally, but we've shipped extensions. We've also shipped stuff on the Teams Marketplace. Teams Marketplace has a lot of vetting, and I think if you're Microsoft, you look at the VS Code extension marketplace as a cost center, charge for it. So I just wonder if like internally the resourcing and stuff. But maybe after Microsoft, who literally got hacked themselves, because GitHub is a Microsoft, product now, maybe they'll look at this problem more closely and the benefit of everyone. And there's tools like Socket, right, that will help you on the library side, and there's tools like Koi that will like screen things in the extension marketplaces. But I just feel like it's kind of a sad state if we need everyone to buy other tools to just do have like basic sanity and security, especially companies that are below the security poverty line. Like the answer can't be we're going to have commercial companies solve all of these things. We need these ecosystems to hopefully get the support they need, right, to go and solve these problems.
Oh yeah, 100% agree. We've definitely created a self-looking ice cream cone in the security industry where, every problem then requires a new product to be purchased, right? And yeah, agreed. Like a lot of this should be basics, both for the vendors that are making these systems and for the security teams that are trying to shore it up.
Yep, I say that as a security vendor.
Yeah, it's also difficult too, I think, with like VS Code in particular, because VS Code, you don't need to go purchase an actual like enterprise license or whatnot to be able to use it. And so there's a sense in which they're dipping into the open source community in that regard. But it's just the open source community, I think there needs to be a stronger delivery, I think, on kind of the assumed security social contract that they have with the developers. Because again, a lot of people assume that if something, particularly if something's coming from Microsoft, that there's been a lot that has gone into shoring it up, securing it, etc. And agreed, you can only do so much, and at the end of that, it's up to the actual user to make sure that it's properly secured. But it does seem like there needs to be a reckoning where vendors are shoring up the quality of the systems that they're providing. And then security teams need to stop buying new things and focus on how do I go back to basics? How do I actually use or implement table stakes security that has been known for a long time and stop chasing the shiny tool simply because it has AI or whatnot appended to the name?
Yeah, there was a good tweet from the Mitchell Hashimoto who founded HashiCorp, and he was talking about how the open source is like there's not really a supply chain because you're not paying for it, right? He's like Red Hat is their business is built on being a supply chain for open source, but we can't be like I don't know angry at these maintainers who are very limited resources. A lot of these people are doing this for fun and being targeted. Like the Axios thing, one of the maintainers was like invited to a Slack, right, of a fake company. They got him on a Zoom. It's not like they have security team. So I think as like a vendor, like, like at Mirage, we own the outcomes, right? We own our security. If we picked a library and it got compromised, like that's kind of on us. We can't start like blaming some library that happened that we used. And I think, moreover, we have to be just careful about selection and also do best practices. Like literally, if people just these things are getting caught pretty quickly. If you just pin versions with hashes and you wait a week, you're good, right? And that includes development machines because what we're seeing now, right, is all of these things are infostealers running on someone's dev box, not even necessarily in production, right? But yeah, I think you have a good point around just like getting back to the basics on this stuff.
Well, the onus on what open source software and packages and all are included is definitely on whoever is building with that. And I think that there's a sense in which, again, that I think all of it is kind of taken as a first class citizen as opposed to, how regularly is this repo updated? How often are there commits? How responsive are the maintainers of that? No, there's very little of a review, I would say, that I've seen across the board until you start actually, turning the screws on, hey, like, why do we actually have this package here? Do we actually need this? Do we see that there's enough of an engagement by the maintainers that if we have a risk or concern or vulnerability that they'll be able to fix it quickly? And if the answer is not, then sometimes the right answer, even though it might hurt, is maybe we need to build this in-house or fork it and do what we need to do in-house or just find something else to get done what we need to get done.
Yeah, that's actually the second part of his tweet was that he's like, yeah, and all his projects, he would kind of always, vendor library or strip it down to what he needed. And I think, again, back to the AI golden age thing, there's a lot of code we have now that would have been libraries in the past, where now we just go and have the AI replicate the function that we need, and the
Mhm.
code base is cleaner and more secure for it. But there's so much less of an excuse now that you can build entire utility libraries in like 5 minutes with a coding agent. So, but I don't know. I also don't know how both are open source, because some of these projects now, a lot of them are going closed source because you can do that.
Mhm.
There's a bit of a business model crisis there.
Yeah, no, there is. But I mean, I think open source will always be there to some degree, right? Because the whole idea behind, computing, I think in general, the internet, and a lot of what I think true software developers really seek is kind of that open source contribution towards what people are trying to get out of computing and information technology in general. We've definitely benefited a lot from our relationship with the Apache Software Foundation and Airflow community at large. And so, even though there's definitely a sense in which we have to manage the potential risks that that might bring, there's also been a lot of benefits that have come from that for Astronomer specifically. And there's also a lot of maturity that Apache Software Foundation brings to the table with the governance and structure and requirements, and so that maturity has really helped the relationship between our company and that organization.
Well, Josh, thanks so much for hopping on for the Emergency Developer Security podcast here
Yeah,
and all the tips.
always. Thank you.